The time has come. We must release this computer from its tiny cage of a case to unlock its true gaming potential. And potential it has. A surprising amount, in fact. For whatever reason, this small form PC escapes a lot of the limitations we see in other OEM office-style PCs from around this time. Not in terms of raw computing power, but in features and upgrade possibilities. In fact, one of the main setbacks of this computer is simply the small form factor that it's in. This computer is the HP Slimline 270, the HP Slimline 270-P043W. Why do they call it that? I don't know. Why not just the 270 or something? Even though its small form factor is a perfect size for a mini cloud prison as a punishment for his constant interruptions, it's not great for gaming. Yet. So let's break it down and talk about the specs as we free the beast. Originally, I bought this for its emulation potential, but I've since made a better emulation system. See wall-mounted emulation PC video, so I'm going in a different direction. The original cost was $75. It came with 8GB DDR4 2400 MHz RAM, which I'm upgrading to 16GB. And as far as the CPU, it only had an i3. It was the i3 7100, but I have another CPU from a different deal, so we're going to be swapping that out with the i7 7700. This is a 4-core, 8-thread processor that's clocked at 3.6 GHz base, 4.2 GHz turbo boost. Now, I've kind of got that stuff set up first, and then I'm going to rip everything out of the case to get it set up in an open environment. A very shoddy, haphazard, makeshift open environment. Aside from those specs, which are pretty decent, there's 2 points that really set this apart from other office PCs from around this era. First is the M2 slot. While this is now common, computers from around this time were pretty hit or miss on if they supported an M2 drive. We're going to go ahead and install one now. And then another important and really surprising note about this machine is that it has a standard 24-pin power connector. This allows us to use a newer power supply with higher wattage and PCIe connectors for a GPU. This is unique and really cool, seeing as most similar office PCs from around this time have sort of proprietary connectors that make it difficult or sometimes impossible to use anything other than the usually subpar stock power supply. For example, I have a lot of older HP Elite desks and Pro desks, and while their potential is surprising and they are very capable, the proprietary power connectors on the motherboard have always been a huge disappointment. I've used some sort of custom adapters for them before, but those are usually kind of questionable. So the 24-pin connector is going to be huge for unlocking this device's gaming potential. Or so I hope. If you've been watching for a while, you know how quickly things can go bad for me. That's why we have the pool noodle. So with our main components installed, we're going to, again, just crack this out of the case. I'm going to set it up on these sort of makeshift things I have. It's just a bolt with a nut sitting on top. The motherboard's going to kind of rest on that just to keep it off the table or whatever I have at the moment that's serving as a table. All right, pulling it out of the case, getting it set up here. in the open. And the final thing, aside from all the components I mentioned, is that we're going to install a GPU. Now this is a full-sized GPU, the GTX 1080 Ti, which would not fit in the case, but we can use it now that it's in this open setup. As I was setting this up, the GPU installation did get a tad bit redonkulous, which is true to form as the whole setup is a little shaky, but I was able to get it to work with a riser cable. And also it requires power connectors from a new power supply that also wouldn't fit in the case, but we can set up now. And once we have everything set up and connected and ready to roll, we're just going to do some testing and see how it plays out. One other random note is that I'm really surprised what this motherboard is capable of, considering its very small size. The size itself has piqued my interest, and I plan on using it in some future videos where that could come into play. Alright, here we go. Alright, we're up and running, so I'm going to go through the boring stuff like installing Windows and all the drivers and everything, and then we'll test out some gaming and see what we can do. Judging by the specs and previous similar builds I've done, I do have relatively high hopes. Everything's installed, and I'm going to do some testing with the usual suspects, starting with Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Everything we're going to play is 1080p, highest in-game graphical settings. Now, quick note, I only have a cheap capture card, so the recording itself is 60 FPS, but we have the true frame rate in the top left corner. And it looks like in this game we're hanging around an average of 70 with some dips to 60 and some jumps to around 100. Next up is Doom Eternal. One day I'm actually going to play these games and not just run in circles to test systems. But time does fly, it's just hard to get into it. Anyway, with Doom, I have no idea what's going on. It's consistently showing a frame rate above 200 FPS. Now, considering my monitor is 144 Hz and we're only getting like 70 FPS on Fallen Order, I would venture to say something's wrong here. But anyway, as far as gameplay goes, it does look and feel good, and the performance is really nice, just as far as actually playing it. But I've got to say, even outside of a case, this GPU is cooking. I can feel the heat radiating off it from like a foot away. But even with the likely incorrect frame rate, it's fair to say we're doing much better than we would do if this was caged up in its little prison of a case. With other office PCs, there's typically several obstacles to this kind of gaming. Primarily the power connector issue. But here, ultimately, the only thing holding this Office PC back was the small form factor. One thing I feel inclined to mention, even though it kind of goes without saying, is that you're probably going to want a case. What I'm doing here is really just for fun, for the sake of the project, and to mess around with some stuff I had laying around anyway. And as always, for my entertainment, but hopefully for yours as well. So thank you for watching this video, and I will see you later.